Welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
Hi, I'm Sharon, and I'm the host of A Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. Firstly, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present, and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. Hello, everybody.
And we'd like to just start off straight away today on, I was just going to talk, Sharon, about how valuable it is to have children's bookshops in your city or close to where you live, or what do you think?
What do I think? Well, since I virtually like to live in bookshops, but even, and I know that you're talking about that from not only from the teacher perspective, but as child perspective, that opportunity to be in a place where you can choose. In fact, I will just mention an interesting thing where a teacher said to me the other day where they'd actually done a bit of a survey with the school about children, how many children sort of owned books at home, and a number of parents wrote back saying, do you know, we buy books for our children, but we hadn't thought about letting them choose. And that makes a difference. So we are so fortunate to have bookshops, children's bookshops.
Specialising in children's books.
Yes, with such knowledgeable bookshop people. What do we call bookshop? What's the collective name for children's bookshop people? Oh. We should make one.
Yes, we should. I mean, booksellers, but for some reason I don't like that term, and I'm not sure why.
No.
But welcome to Rebecca on our
Thank
podcast. Coming back from, we had a previous session on with Rebecca, and this one we are going into the topic of great books for older readers.
Yes,
Yep.
yes. So Rebecca Bird from Pegi Williams Bookshop in our fabulous city here, in Walkerville.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. And lovely to hear that in this year too, lots of visits to schools happening. So bookshops are important and being in bookshops, but you also take that to schools, which is so exciting.
It is. And I guess it's sort of, that's what I was thinking coming here today, that this is sort of what I do. Like, I've got a pile of books in front of me, for those of you that obviously can't see, and that's what I do. For some reason, I don't take notes, and I don't need notes to talk about books, but I sometimes just have to hold them in my hand or see the cover, and that's enough for it to jog some memories in my brain so I can tell you a little bit about it.
Yes.
So what's it like being surrounded by books every day? You're just...
It's excellent, but it's also terrifying when you think about all the books you'll never read. So I can read a lot. I do read a lot, but when you see the amount of books that are published every month, like it's hundreds of books we get in, brand new titles every month. So to keep up with that is hard, and you just have to make that realisation that you're never going to, because you'll never. It's people that are readers that have reading piles. There's the big joke that nobody's reading pile ever gets smaller.
No.
It only ever gets bigger, gets reshuffled.
Yes.
But it'll never go.
No.
And that's the same with books. Like they're not going to stop being published. There's always going to be something new. So
our problem and teachers' problem is knowing what is out there and, what's best for kids, and, how can we get to those things, and there's going to be certain books that are going to connect with my kids better than others, and how do I choose those? And I guess that's the struggle, isn't it? And as you say, there's this whole lot coming out now, but we're in this world of the last 20, 30 years where we had a huge amount that's been produced and it's still out there.
Yeah, That's right.
as well as all the
That's
new...
exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's why you'll never catch up, because
No.
there's all the stuff from before, and things all of a sudden somebody will tell you about a book that was published 10 years ago that you've never heard of, and you think, oh, there's another one. I've got to add that to my list.
So even if you slept like 3 hours a night and then the rest of your time was all reading,
Never.
you'd never get...
I know. I mean, there are worse problems to have, but, but it's just one of those things, and we get that all the time with people coming in. It's just that, and adult readers are the same. For an adult reader, you just have to resign yourself to and that's why you have to think that it has to be fun. When you're reading it, you have to be enjoying it.
Yes.
Because there's only so much time.
Yes, because we talked about, with Paul Kelly, we talked about just going for those poems that really connect with you and just don't worry about the others, just go with the ones that you really love and that's it,
Yeah.
Would you say that about books?
Yeah.
But give them a go. But
I always say give them a go. And I guess I'm always coming from the point of view, as much as, I can recommend novels for class novels, my main focus is reading for fun and reading for pleasure.
Yeah.
So I think that's the real thing, and that's what I always say, is that it has to be fun, and it should be fun. And if it's what you're reading is not fun, then that's not the right one for now.
And fun could be a serious book.
Oh, yeah. Fun, I guess, is probably not the right word, but it's got to be satisfying to you. It's got to be something that you're enjoying reading. Yeah, it could be making you cry and you still love it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it doesn't have to be fun, but you have to be having a good time with that book.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's kind of the payback, isn't it, for all the books that we can't read,
Yes.
for every book we do read, the difference that makes for us, that absolute satisfaction, achievement, insight, discovery, whatever. Well, it's probably all of those things that it brings, but it's so worth it.
Yes.
So, and that's what reading, that's what we want it to be, worth it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you have secondary schools that you go to, or they come to the shop, or...
Yeah, I mean, they buy however they would like to. So a lot will just buy online. I do go out to secondary schools, and I have done more this year of going out to secondary schools talking about books as well, with the students, having them choose. So that's something that hasn't really happened a lot. And it is interesting. It's something that I think for all year levels, I think it's valuable
for them to choose.
And just to hear somebody different talk about books.
Yes.
Because that's the thing. I think they're harder to engage. I think high school students, I was thinking about this a lot, knowing that that's what I'm going to be talking about today, and that for a high school English teacher, you only get those kids for a certain amount of time every week. It's not like a primary school teacher who really gets to know their kids so well over the course of a year. That if that teacher is really trying to hone in on what kids want to read, that's much easier because they have that relationship. High school's harder. And even high school librarians harder because they are not there as often. And I also think there's a lot more distraction as they get older. And that's not just technology, and it's not just those things, it's just life. There's a lot more homework, there's a lot more commitment. So they really, really do just want that pleasure reading because it has to be something completely different. It's why I guess the stuff that they're going to choose to read is probably quite far removed from what they have to read in a classroom.
Yes.
Because they are reading for fun.
Yes.
So there will be a difference, I think.
We worked in one regional high school, I think it was Peterborough, where they decided to have a 15-minute time slot every day for the whole school to read, even though it was a high school, which was one way of them getting their reading going, because there's so much content they're doing in all their subject areas. There's not the time.
No.
But the big piece about that, of course, is about, Rebecca, you said, about engaging them, and it's really about, I think, the word we've been talking about in the schools that we've been working with is really motivating. How do we motivate children? We've got children who can read, secondary students who can read, but don't necessarily choose to read for fun. And then we have some for whom reading hasn't been, the right doors haven't opened yet for reading to be for them to feel like they're successful at that. Because what is that saying? Sometimes, people say read, those who haven't come to reading yet just haven't found the right book.
Yeah.
So.
And some are reading at an older age, but they're not necessarily comprehending strongly.
Yes.
That's another.
Well, that's part of the motivation, isn't it? If you're reading something that you're you're wanting to read, you're going to engage with that differently than not.
Yeah, but
anyway, on that motivation front, Rebecca's, this is always a joy. She's sitting here. I want my hands over all of those books as well. 3 piles.
I do. There are 3 separate piles. And the other thing I was just going to say briefly, I think older readers, YA readers, are lucky in that if they are readers or if they're even on the edge of becoming a reader, there's massive amounts of really good social media for readers. Instagram, authors give massive amounts of their time and constantly posting and getting you excited about their new books. And Twitter. Like I'm not a real tweeter. I do like Instagram, and they call it, in the book world, they call it Bookstagram. So that's a hashtag.
That's all new for me.
So hashtag Bookstagram So I think there are very good avenues, and there will be so many avid readers, YA readers, that have massive followings on Instagram. So young teenage readers who are constantly writing about books and talking about books. And I think that sort of peer guidance is something that is something to log into. And authors that have really good blogs, really good websites that are very, Tristan Banks is an amazing author.
Yes.
He makes himself quite accessible, and it's just something that I think young readers, and like I said, it's especially teenage readers, because they've got access to the phones, they've got access to the iPads.
Yes.
They can be out there in that world. So it's an exciting thing.
That has just turned my world upside down into a glorious space of, wow, so that's whole communities.
It is a massive community. Worldwide community as well. So you get to hear about things that are coming, all over the world, and they have even they have like a blog tour. So a new author that's got a book that will virtually tour. So like different bloggers will, host them, and they will get out there and get their messages out there. So, yeah, I'm not very good at it. I do have in an Instagram account, and I do have a blog, but I'm not very consistent because I'm too busy reading. That's my excuse.
Well, that just there is that little piece that's a little pearl there, isn't it? About just letting children or young adult readers or young adult, yes.
Yeah, they are young adult.
Yeah.
That's young adult readers. Yep.
Yeah, connecting with, like, we all want to be part of that community. Like, who's reading what we're reading? Who's interested in what we're interested in? What authors speak to us? Those authors that I can't think off the top of my head now who the author was. The quote where she talked about that, the older she got, the more she realised that authors understood her better than any other adult in the world. Because here they were writing about the things that she was feeling, that she was experiencing. And I thought, I think, yes, when we can connect with authors, we do feel like they understand us better than and maybe it's because they can say things better than we might say in general conversation.
It's that
too,
articulating a feeling that you don't even know you have necessarily, or a way that you feel that you've never really thought about until someone tells you, and you think, oh, that's me.
That's what it is. Yeah.
Okay, so
fantastic.
I do have a little pile. The one that I'll talk about first, I think I won't talk about all of them. These are just really here to, spark my brain into some sort of action. But high school libraries and high school library collections, I think, are probably facing a very interesting time in the content that we're finding in that YA fiction. And there will obviously be some schools that don't find certain content suitable for their school values or their ethos, or for whatever. If it's a religious school, there are certain things they won't want in there. And when I think about that, I don't think about it as book banning, whereas in America they ban books. Like it's a thing. They have book banning. So I've just read this book. It's called Suggested Reading, and it's by a guy called Dave Connis. And the reason I liked it so much is because it really made me think about book banning. It's a girl. Her name is Clara. She loves the library. She volunteers in the library. And so when she accidentally reads an email to her librarian that is a list of books that he has to take off the shelf, she's mortified and she doesn't understand why. So she sort of starts this fight as to why. Now, the school in the book is a private school, and that sort of plays an important part because she actually has a meeting with the principal. There's a lot of backwards and forwards in this book, and he does say to her that we're a private school. We make our own rules. We have our values and our ethos, and if there are certain things that we feel do not fit that, then it's perfectly acceptable for us to not have them in the library. She is not convinced. But it's interesting because what she finds out during the course of this story is that how one book can affect you as a person could affect somebody in a completely different place, in a completely different way, because they're coming from a different place.
Yes.
So when something quite dramatic happens in the story, she has sort of handed over her favourite book to this person because for her it means this, but has given it to them, and for them it means something completely different. And there's some almost tragic outcome in that. She starts to really question that all books are not the same for all people. But there's a really, really good quote in here from a non-reader, and this is what he says. So this is page 336 of the book. I'm not like a book guy, but isn't the point of all this book stuff, like what Mrs. Croft was teaching us, that unrestricted access to books allows us to be challenged and changed, to learn new things and to critically think about those things and not be afraid of them, to be better than we were before we read them?
Wow.
Yeah.
And there's that's the core, isn't it?
And that's what I think. So
why writers write.
There's lots of different, but it is a really good book to read, even as an adult, if you think you don't believe in censorship, to see another side of it and a logical side. It's not a sensational reason to take these books off the shelf. There's valid reasons. There's, and there's, like I said, there's plenty of schools that won't have certain books on their shelf for whatever reason. And that's almost like self-censoring. I don't necessarily think it is banning. They're not saying this book is terrible. They're just saying it's not okay for you now in this school or in this context. So, and
the student could go to another library and get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not totally banned, is it?
No, it's not totally banned. So there have been a couple of books out of the US about banned books, younger novels as well, but this one I thought was particularly good because it really did show two sides, and she did start to question whether there was a place for not having something in the library. So
nicely done, isn't it? Through the eyes of the ones who are being given access to some things and not to others.
Yeah.
And to work through that as a process and what that means, what it means for them.
So
it's almost a little bit like Mem Fox talked about letting the book just be read and not interfering with it, and just let the book speak to you. But banning a book is going to a bigger level of that, isn't it? Yeah.
And I'm not saying the only other one I'll talk about, but probably the best book that I've read this year, which is the reason I have brought it with me and while I talk about it, is called When the World Was Ours. It's by an author called Liz Kessler, and it is set in 1936 in Vienna. That's where it starts off. It's 3 characters, Leo, Elsa and Max. They are 11 years old when the book starts, and it is a very interesting look at the Holocaust. So these sorts of books are extremely, you don't want to say popular, but they are, and especially non-readers seem to really engage with these war stories. The Morris Gleitzman series about Felix Once, they're books that kids read and they love them. So this is older, so it's one step ahead of that. And the reason I find this one more fascinating probably than any other is that the Leo character is the author's grandfather. So she has a personal connection to the story, which I think always makes a massive difference. So you have 3 friends. It starts off in Vienna on Leo's 11th birthday, and they're on the big wheel in Vienna. And they have a chance encounter with an English couple that sort of is a massively important part of the story, but you don't know that at the time. And so once sort of Hitler's reign starts to become more obvious, these three friends go their separate ways. So Leo and his mother, his father has been taken by the Nazis. He and his mother try and find a way to get to England, and that's how they use the connections with these people that they just met for 10 minutes on the big wheel. Elsa and her family go to Czechoslovakia, but it's Max, because Max is German and Max wants to be Hitler Youth.
Oh.
And it's a very interesting perspective because you don't often see that side of things. And you realise that these children didn't really know. It was the ultimate thing for him to be. His dad was a Nazi officer, so he just wanted to be the best little Nazi that he could be. And it's not until the end of the book that he realises what that's going to mean. And it's very confronting. Like it's definitely a YA read, but it's a really easy read because it's so compelling and just an interesting perspective.
Is that a one and only from that author?
No. Interestingly, she's written a lot of series about mermaids.
Oh, true.
Yeah. No,
but as you said, there's a personal connection with this story.
Yeah.
Well, there may be with mermaids too.
Maybe. No, but this one is a real standout. I'll just quickly, actually, which way will I go? Own voice is a big thing in teenage and YA writing. Well, in writing in general, and we're finding more and more of that. And I think there was a thing a little while ago.
Sorry, can you explain what that is?
So own voice is when an author is from another culture, maybe come to Australia, or, not a white Australian person writing their story. It's somebody else writing their story. And there was a thing, I guess a little while ago, that we don't have, a huge multicultural representation in our writing in Australia. But I think that that's just something that has had to happen over the years, once people are, living in our country and feeling, comfortable to write. And so it's the next few generations. So the couple of things that I bought, this is Own Story. This is an Indigenous writer, but this is Gary Lonsborough. It's his first book and it's called The Boy from the Mish. And I loved this book. Every now and then you just read a book and you think, it just feels really Australian. It doesn't feel like his first novel. It just feels like a really good story. And again, talking about those issues that some schools might have issue with, this is an Indigenous boy who lives on a mission who realises he's gay, but he can't be because he's an Aboriginal boy and there are no Aboriginal kids on the mission. So it's how he's dealing with that. So it's just so good.
So not a contemporary story though?
No, contemporary.
It is still contemporary?
Yeah. Contemporary, very, very modern. He's sort of basically about to drop out of high school because he doesn't really know what he wants to do. So it's just one of those sort of like mission towns, like on the edge of another town. So it's just a community, but that's what they call it, the Mish.
So the boy from the Mish is the mission.
The title.
Yeah, Boy from the Mish. So he lives on the mission. Yep. And it's not until a cousin... it's a boy who's staying with his auntie comes to stay for the summer that he starts to realise that he might be gay. And, it's just those confusing feelings just for anybody. But he's got that added weight of the culture on top of him, and will he be accepted? So that's an interesting one. And Tiger Daughter. So this is Chinese-Australian. Rebecca Lim. And just the pressures that some families put on their kids to succeed, and also the disappointment in having a daughter, that, you don't need to put so much effort into her because she's a girl, and shame about certain things in different cultures. So we're just getting a lot of these really, really interesting stories that are coming out that the people that are writing it have either lived it or have grown up in communities where that has happened. So that's what they're calling own voices, that we're getting these stories.
Own voice, and that really that bravery to expose.
Yeah.
Own feelings, own confusions, own challenges, own struggles, own what a wonderful connection for young readers.
Yeah.
Also allowing young readers to tolerate other cultures. by learning about them.
And that's the thing, because I am probably one of those people that has not had a lot to do with the Chinese Australian culture, and you have maybe most people have sort of ideas of what that might be like, but you don't ever get to see. And I think I said that last time. That's my biggest thing about reading, is to be able to see somebody else's life. Yes. And it might not be somebody in another country, or it might not be somebody in another time. It could just be somebody down the road who, you know, and, you know, these sorts of stories, somebody that you might see at school every day.
Yes, exactly.
And you don't really know anything about what's going on in their life at home, and you might never have even bothered to ask.
Yes. So yes. Or even known how to open up a conversation about
That's
that.
right.
Like what do I ask somebody about?
And that brings me to this one. And to be honest, I haven't read all the stories in this. So this is a book called Growing Up Disabled in Australia. So it's put out by Black Ink Press, and they've put out a whole lot of books like Growing Up Aboriginal in Australia, Growing Up African in Australia, Growing Up Asian in Australia. And I think the disabled one is really eye-opening, because what we were talking about just then is you don't know how to start that conversation, or you don't know the right words to use or the right terms to use. So this is a collection of disabled Australians who have written their stories. So they're not authors. They had thousands, I think, of people sending their stories in, and Carly Findlay is the editor of this one. And it's heavy going, so it's not the sort of book I would really suggest you read from start to back, because a lot of these people's stories are not nice. They've had to go through a lot of struggle, a lot of heartache, a lot of tough times. So you might pick out different stories, especially I think in the classroom. There's really good teacher's notes that go with this one. But it is that sort of opening that door to what it means. And disabled is an okay word. They're okay. You know, people with a disability are okay to say that they're disabled. But again, different people have different feelings about different things. So what okay for one might not be okay for the other. But yeah, it's a hefty read, and definitely upper secondary, even adult. But yeah, that's a good one.
Now, in that original bundle that you had, the one under When the World Was Ours,
I'm Not Dying With You Tonight.
Is that in the same?
This is American author. So two authors, Kimberly Jones and Gilly Segal. It is own voice. This was very, very topical last year when we had all the race riots in the US.
Yes.
This is set in America in a small town, I guess, where Friday night football is a big thing. And this is two girls. So we've got Lena and Campbell, and they're not friends, but they find themselves in this situation this particular Friday night. So Lena is the black girl. So one of these authors is a black American and the other is white. So they've written alternate chapters from different characters' points of view. So Lena is at this football game. Campbell is working sort of on the drinks stand. And when a fight breaks out between a white kid and a black kid, and I can't remember the actual specifics of it, but it starts off very small, but very, very quickly escalates, and they know that they have to get out. So it starts off in the school, ends up going into the town where they're smashing up cars, they're looting businesses, and it's the story of these two girls who they were not friends, but have found themselves together on this one night, having made judgments of the other based on nothing but what they look like, and realising that their judgments were perhaps wrong, and that perhaps their judgments about a lot of things were wrong. And it's how they sort of work together to get out of this terrible situation on this one night.
Oh, the title alone had me. And then I love this whole idea, two authors. Two voices, but the one story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, no, it's very good and very readable. And I guess, we're talking about things, again, whether that could engage a student, because it is something that they've seen a lot in the media. And what would that be like if you were caught in the middle of that riot? And what would it mean if you were a black person? And what would it mean if you were a white person? So you don't always want to read, the news to find out that. No. And this is fiction, but it is full of, feeling. And
Yes.
I think that's,
Well, and that's, feeling, and so therefore that's what builds understanding. If
Yeah.
we can actually identify or have some insight into what that feels like, because even if we might not be, have found ourselves in that situation, we can pretty quickly identify with the fact that we've judged someone else.
Yes, and I think that's the thing.
yeah.
It's that judging.
Yeah.
This one here, and I bought this partly because it's a thin one.
I was going to say, this is a very slim little...
So this is actually a Barrington Stoke title. So I don't know if you've come across Barrington Stoke publications before.
No.
Barrington Stoke are a publisher that publish for dyslexic readers. So
yes,
they publish with a particular font on a particular coloured paper and a particular thickness of paper. So just the fact that they're written for dyslexic readers doesn't deter the fact that they're really good books. Barrington Stoke title won the Carnegie Medal last year. So they're quality writing, often thinner, so that's the appeal.
Yes.
Interesting topics. This one I really, really love the idea. It's called The Disconnect, and it's English. Barrington Stoke's an English publisher, so they are all English writers, but very good writers. This is what happens if an eccentric old scholar comes to your school and offers a £1,000, so $2,000, let's say, reward, if you can go without using your mobile phone for 6 weeks. So challenging for anybody, particularly, let's say, I can't remember exactly how old they are, but let's say they're, year 11 students. This is one of the girls in it. It's an interesting time for her for this to have happened, because she's in a situation where her father and I think sister are living overseas, and she really, really wants to get there, but she doesn't have the money. So it's a very good incentive for her. But she's also at that point where you can sometimes have, especially girls, I think it's pretty much mainly girls, who rely so much on this social media and so much on, so much so that she will send a photo of what she's wearing to her friends before she goes out to get the approval that it's okay to, to wear that. So all this pressure and, that social media pressure of if you're not somewhere but you can see what everybody else is doing. So that, fear of missing out thing. So they decide to do this. And so it's 6 weeks. They're allowed to have an old school mobile phone that you can actually just use to make phone calls.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes. But
they're allowed access to the internet on a computer at home at night. But it's just that instant gratification thing of being able to have like that mini computer in your hand. They have to go without that. So it's an interesting 6 weeks, and it's how they change, and it's how it starts off very uncomfortable and very anxiety inducing, but how it's also very freeing.
I find that really interesting, that the anxiety increases
At the start,
To
yeah.
start
yes,
with, yeah.
when in fact, we, for many people, they will acknowledge that, being connected, being so connected is already anxiety inducing, and that in fact heightens without it. That's, wow.
So yeah, it's a nice, like I said, I'm a big fan of a book that's quite simple,
Yes.
but has a big message or a lot to talk about. Like, that's a great class novel, really, or, for a small group.
Yes.
Or, or an experiment in your own school.
Yes.
Not saying that we should need a monetary reward, but just to see who, and, it's not just kids. I don't know many adults that could go 6 weeks without their
That's true.
smartphone.
Yeah.
So it's definitely, I'm not making any judgments on teenagers. I think it would be extremely hard.
Who was the author of the book The Winter of Our Disconnect? Kathy Lett?
Oh, maybe.
I think it might have been. When I read that, and that would have come out, that's probably 15 years ago when that came out. That was before, I remember reading that thinking, because that really wasn't a lot about mobile phones. That was more about just access to a computer. And I remember reading it at the time thinking, oh, yes, this is such a good idea, just being disconnected more than connected,
Yeah.
but to technology.
Yeah.
But, of course, what that,
the flip side of that is being more connected to yourself.
Yeah, and to other people in real life.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, I think we learnt from the COVID year last year that there was a whole lot more nurturing that was going on because people were going for walks and, reconnecting in better ways. Yeah.
I have one. I know we've talked a lot about novels, but I know you were also talking about poetry.
Yes. Oh, lovely.
So I have this brand new book in front of me. It's called Commonwealth, 2 words, Greg Dries. So it is a slam poetry persuasive.
That's getting a few things in at once.
I know. I'm pretty sure that's technically what it is. It's not something I understand what slam poetry is, but I'd not come across the slam poetry persuasive before. Mm-hmm. So again, for those of you that aren't, watching me, it is a picture book by all intents and purposes. It's a larger book. It's got a hardcover. It's got a beautifully illustrated shiny cover. But it is a poem. It is a slam poem. And it says on the back, all that I'm wishing is that you take a moment to listen. A slam poetry persuasive and powerful vision of unity by Greg Dries. A picture book for older readers. And it does say that it does contain confronting imagery in it. But it's all about Indigenous culture and how we can connect better with it. I also like the fact that he's got a part in here about not just Indigenous people, but like I think what we were talking about before. It is often a shame that a lot of people no longer know their neighbour's name. So I give you a new aim so we don't feel ashamed. Find out their favourite game, from which country they came. On the outside we may be different, but inside we are the same. So it's got a lot of interest. It's got a lot of our history that, we need to be reminded of.
Yes.
It's, if nothing else, he's made a flag.
Oh, I love
and here it is.
And I love that flag.
Wow.
Yes. Well,
he makes
that speaks to me really strongly.
This is a book that, I put it in for this year level because I do think it can work perfectly well with secondary schools. Yeah. I think it would be good for debating. It would just be good for perspective and obviously for poetry. But I can't really show you what the flag that Greg has designed, but it is like a dark blue. It has the Southern Cross on the right-hand side. And it's got this beautiful illustration on the left, sort of separated with a boomerang, but the emblem on the left is our floral emblem. It's the green and gold wattle. And he also makes a point of perhaps it would be easy to change the date as well of Australia Day because the golden wattle flowers on the 1st of June. So maybe that would be a good date.
I just love that flag.
Meaning.
I think we could put that up on our Facebook group just to show them that because it is fantastic.
Yeah, there's so much more to this book, but if that is just something that is very striking to me, and I think to myself, well, surely that's it.
Yes, I know.
We've solved it.
No, but the meaning, I see the meaning.
Yeah.
Really clearly in that. Yeah. And the 1st of June, the wattle flowering, and that's that other piece, isn't it? About the
season.
What's significant about what nature, what this land, what country is doing around us all the time, not what's sort of been overlaid on this country, but what this country speaks. We need to listen to country.
In Aboriginal terms, there's a whole lot more seasons than the 4 seasons we've got.
That's right.
Depending on where, but certainly at different times, and that's all geared not by a date, but by
flowering of plants.
By what's happening, both on the earth and above the earth.
Yeah.
So he's illustrated and written this.
So he's written and illustrated a lot of picture books, generally younger stories.
Right.
But this is a brand newie, and it's. It's excellent.
I'm going to have to get that one.
But the other quickly, poetry again. So last year, Amberlyn Quaimolina put out this book called Living on Stolen Land. So she is Sally Morgan's Daughter.
Oh, true.
This, again, if we're looking at the size of a book, this one is tiny, like really, really tiny. It's got a beautiful illustration of a tree on the front. But I keep saying to people, don't be deceived. This is not a book for young readers. It is a verse novel, which is my favourite.
Yes.
It is very confronting as a white Australian to read it because she's not pulling any punches. She's like, this is how it is. And what it's asking you is, without reading all of it, but it's the very, very first verse is called Stolen Land. And after reading that, it was enough to just sort of take my breath away and think, okay, I have to read the rest because what can we do? This book is all about opening discussion and what questions to ask. But it says you are living on stolen land. What can you do about it? So it's really good, and it's not berating. It's just stating facts. Yes. But it's
gets you thinking.
And and using the power of that spare language.
Yes.
To really speak to us.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think it's the sort of thing I think you read once, but then you'd have to go back. Because it's like you said, even though it's it's spare text is not a lot of words to take in, but it's very powerful.
Big ideas to take in. Yeah.
And you see different things each time you read it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's a beauty.
Oh, fantastic. Because the other nice connection I want to make with that is with the Australian curriculum at the moment in its consultation process. We know that this is exactly the type of literature that we need to have more of in our schools, because we want to have more of the Indigenous voice, not them being written about.
No, that's that whole own voice thing again.
Yes, yes. And so Indigenous voice, we need to have people's voice in this. And these are fabulous examples of bringing that to us as young adults who are, on the cusp of, launching into the big world of, what they are ready to take into that and giving them insights through literature, through those voices is so empowering.
And
what a rich collection.
I must also say that, I'm all for books and I'm a big reader, but I think that, teenage readers should also not feel bad about audiobooks. I'm a massive audiobook listener.
Yes.
I double my reading because of audiobooks, because I listen to audio, because, kids will often say, but I might want to play sport, or I'll go for a run, or, do all these other things. Whereas I literally listen to books in the car when I'm walking, when I'm cleaning, when I'm cooking. I don't really listen to music as much anymore, but I will listen to books. I don't think it's cheating. I think having a book well read to you, it's like, we're saying you're never too old to have somebody read to you. And I think that's the same with an audiobook. I can listen to a much wider range of genre than I will read. So
that's an interesting...
If it's well read. So... Yeah,
and that's like we talk about read aloud, and that's the power of read aloud in the classroom. So you're actually getting your own read alouds all the time.
Yes.
Do you have a preferred platform for it, or?
Because I'm a book nerd, I have to do everything. So public libraries have an amazing system now, and it's Overdrive is the overall platform, but South Australian libraries have Libby.
Oh, yes.
So,
yes.
And that's free?
It's free.
Yes.
And people that maybe if you've looked at Libby a little while ago and you're a little bit disheartened because you didn't think there was a lot on there, it's massively changed. Really, really up-to-date stuff on there now.
Easy to access?
Easy to access. And if you just want to look at audiobooks, you can just look at YA audiobooks. So it really can be narrowed down. But
and more accessible, because I know a few... students in secondary schools that said, but there's such a long wait time for everything that I want. Has that changed a bit too? Or
certain things there will be a wait.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's enough on there that you can just reserve everything you want.
Right. Yes.
They do tell you off at some point and they don't let you reserve anymore. But the other really good thing that they do
Good tip.
is that if something comes up for you to borrow and you're not ready, you can actually just say not now, and it doesn't put you to the bottom of the line.
Oh.
It'll let someone in front of you, and then you're the next
and then
person
you're back.
again.
Right.
So it's really
Wow.
good.
These are great tips. Really,
Things-
aren't they? They really are.
So
Things like When the World Was Ours, that's on Libby. So
Fantastic.
So there's a lot of new content on there, but I'm also an Audible subscriber. So
Yeah.
that's a paid.
Is that expensive?
Yes.
I think it's $16.95 a month,
Right.
and for that, you get. I think when you start, you might get more. You get 1 credit a month, but some audiobooks are 20 hours. So you can. It's a lot of listening. So I sort of do a mixture of both. If there's something that I really, really want to read, and it's on Audible, then I'll buy it. But I don't. I sort of only use it for if I can't get it on Libby.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, but yeah, I can't sort of speak highly enough of audiobooks.
Yeah.
So, and I think for non-readers, it still gives you that story.
Yes.
So, and if it makes you maybe pick up a book later, or and sometimes to hear it just makes it easier to comprehend.
But
Yes.
also, and we talked about in the poetry podcast about just hearing the sound of our language is so powerful. Just the vocabulary that you're being immersed in all the time, the
rhythms.
comprehension of of the whole story, it's all happening.
Yeah.
Either whether you read it or you hear it on the audio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm a big audio book listener.
Yeah.
And there may be people who might, after listening to the podcast, think of if they've worked in schools with audio, whether it's primary or secondary, that have done that in some ways, because I know, schools, or certainly in primary schools, CDs, libraries had a good CD collection.
Yeah.
But of course there's hardly any
And there's
CDs
probably
available now.
and I'm not aware, but I would be certain that there would be platforms for schools for
Yes.
audio, whether it's a
Yes.
paid, and it probably is. But nobody wants to download CDs or carry CDs around. Everything is, it just makes it so much more accessible to be able to download. So I'm sure that obviously the Libby, anybody can borrow it, but if you're doing it in the classroom and you need it at a certain time, that's when that gets tricky. But like I said, there's probably platforms for that.
Yeah.
It's just an incredibly accessible world now.
Yes.
Our problem is that there's so much out there now
Yes.
and that's why we've got Rebecca here to help us. What do we start with?
No, it makes a big difference to have, it's more motivating to go looking and exploring when, like, this opens doors too to authors, to types of texts, and even being able to name that, to say that there are own voice stories. And that even just puts great power for students in their own writing, thinking own voice story. Is important.
And to see yourself in, me saying that I like it because I get to have an insight into somebody else's life. But it's more important for all of Australia and young readers to see themselves in the writing. So be they a young disabled person, be they a young Chinese Australian, be they a young Aboriginal man, to have their stories that they can read. That's big.
It is. Yeah, it's huge. Now you've got one little lonesome book there.
Oh, I've got two.
This
two
one? That you have. Oh, yes, there are two that you haven't.
There are, but this one I haven't finished. But I put it in because it's another verse novel. And Lorraine Marwood is another author who is very good at verse novels. This one is set in 1969, so it sort of fits in that older range, because even though the main character is quite young, she's looking at and experiencing a whole lot of experiences sort of at a much older level. So it's during the conscription debate with Vietnam, and her sister is involved in a lot of the protesting, and it's a small town and it's very hard to go unnoticed if you were the one who's sort of standing up with a placard.
Yes.
And just thinking about the moon landing. So there's this year of all these really interesting things going on, and she's sort of trying to deal with it. So it's a good young YA.
Right. Yes. Footprints on the Moon.
Footprints on the Moon by Lorraine Marwood. The only other one I bought, and I don't know why, because I read it and it was quite amazing. It's non-fiction and it's by an Australian couple and it's called Fly, the Handbook. It's Financially Literate Youth, which is probably not the most exciting read. But I put it in because if we're having educators listening to this podcast, this book is an absolute must-have for a high school library.
Oh, how good is this?
Because it talks about every single stage of a teenager's life earning money and all the way through to – so it literally starts off with your first job. It looks at setting up bank accounts. It looks at credit cards. It looks at pay rates of your first job and all the different things.
For goodness sake.
And because it's Australian, it's got a whole lot of links to all the important places, like it's got ATO and it's got Money Smart. It talks about budgeting. It talks about your credit history and what that's going to mean for your future. It talks about how to buy your first car. It talks about different types of insurance. It has little stories in there, so little examples of if this person had this insurance and they had this accident, what would that mean? And if this person had this insurance and they had an accident, what would that mean and what would they have to pay?
Goodness sake. So who's the author?
It is a couple. So it is Jai Hobbs and Marley Hobbs, and they're from, I believe, Queensland.
Yes.
It looks at going to uni, looks at HECS debt, it looks at your first flat share and what that means, even what it means if you end up living with someone that you don't like and how do you get out of that.
Oh, my gosh, we need...
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes.
Yes.
I can't mention any names, can't even say it's family. This is just the book that would
looks
be
at
really...
starting your own business, looks at investing. So it literally follows... I read this from front to back because I had to read it for some reason.
Yeah.
I don't think many people would read it that way. I think it's a book that you would just pick up when you needed it.
Yes.
And it's even, I think even registering a business name in here literally goes step by step to this is what the website looks like. You click in the top right-hand corner where it says this and it goes through everything. It's
What's like a little handbook for life, isn't it?
It is a handbook for life. It is not the most, fun read, but it
the
is...
cover looks fun.
Yeah,
the Monopoly board.
It's a Monopoly board, but I think it is a really, really important book. And the fact that it's Australian,
Yes.
I think it's a missing piece. This is the part of so relevant to kids.
Yes, yeah.
And where they're going. And
yeah, because a lot of them are dealing with a financial, the financial more so, well, I don't know. Feels like certainly, look how old I am. Financial literacy, I don't know, it was different way back then, but, it's just such a relevant and it needs something up to date too, all of those.
And I mean, to be fair, this book obviously will date because any book that has, but I think because it's government websites and things like that, those should probably always be there, whether or not they might be called something different. But I think through this book you'd be able to still find your way to where you need to go.
And I bet that little partnership there'd be updated versions of that book as required by the sounds. It's so practical.
Yeah, it is very, very interesting. So that's completely different, not... I read this one. I probably could have been reading a novel, but I read that.
Well, for all those economics secondary teachers out there, there's one that you'll want in your classroom.
And even for homes, for parents with teenagers, just to, getting your first job or this is what you've got to look out for. Because, parents, again, it's been a long time since they've been out there looking for their first job and what does that mean and what's okay and what can an employer ask of you and what can't they and what are your rights.
Yeah.
So,
I'm sold.
I'm going to buy a copy.
In fact, it's like, how do we work this, Rebecca? It's like, don't. If you've got the little machine here right now, we can just pay wave and purchase all of those.
I think we've answered these questions, but we had questions like, how can we find just right text for older students? And we've kind of, by all the things we've been talking about, I think we've answered that really.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard. I think a lot of the time they are disengaged, but I think there's probably enough out there that you can pick something that they will identify with.
Yeah. And I think we talked about this last time too, but it does take the adults to be the ones to open the doors on what's available. and for kids to be talking about books so that recommendations can be made. You know, when someone says, "Oh, I've just read," you know, to be able to share that there's, you know, opportunities and platforms for that. That's, I guess, where those communities, those the bookstagrams.
Yeah, the bookstagrammers
are really, are doing that job.
And even authors are out there, you know, telling you what they've just read, not even just their own books.
Yes.
You know, they're just very generous.
Because I was going to say,
that.
teachers are so time poor. They've got so many things they're doing. To have these avenues to hear about books and where they can go with them.
Yes.
Besides having Rebecca on a podcast, there's other ways to, you know, find out what's going to be connect with this student that's just not connecting. Yeah. They're not reading. How can I get them connected?
Yeah.
And another one was, how do we?
I reckon you just want to go to. Oh, where's that question even gone? Sorry.
Well, one of the questions was, how do we have more time for the kids to read? Well, that's a management thing at the school. We were talking about one school that was trying to start the day with 15 minutes or end the day with 15 minutes so that everybody had more time. Yeah. Because it is access to the books that you want to read, and it's also the time to read them.
And it's also, I in primary schools and in secondaries, I'm still a big believer that the teachers should be reading.
Absolutely.
And that if there is a reading time, then the teacher should be reading, not marking assignments, or because I think that modelling, even all the way through high school, I think that that's one of the most important things. If reading is just something you see, then that is what you do. It's like in homes. You hear stories all the time about kids that don't read, and it's like, well, do the parents read? Well, no. Well, that's part of the thing. Like, reading has to be something that you do, that you see other people doing.
Yes.
So if that's what's happening in your school, and, you know, you see teachers sitting down with a book or talking about books, then that makes a big difference.
Yeah, yeah. The value, if value isn't put on it, it's harder to... You
can't sell something if you don't believe it.
No.
So you can't ask kids to read if you're not going to read.
No, exactly.
So
now, surefire hits for kids that are really struggling. Thinner books, humour. What are the things that are?
To be fair, I think secondary is really tough for humour. There's not
a lot.
Honestly, it seems once you hit YA, it's all doom and gloom. Yeah. I think a lot of it has uplifting endings, but there seems to be a huge amount of issues based. So there's that sort of stuff. There's a lot of fantasy. There's a lot of sort of, I guess there's some more action coming, but still people that I keep going back to, I think that sort of cross over to especially that early secondaries, an author like Jack Heath. His collections of short stories are very good because it's an easy read, it's an engaging read. Like I said, a lot of those Barrington Stokes that are quite good because they're not a confronting read.
I did read Andy Griffith stories to middle secondary, early secondary, and they just love them. You know, because just reading it out loud is just great fun.
And short things that don't take a lot of brain space. I think, because that's the thing. If it's too complicated and too daunting, that you just lose them. So little quick bits, and if it can be funny, that's even better.
Yes.
And I was in an American school, and they loved my Australian accent. So
winning.
That works as well. Now, should we go on to some rapid fire questions, or do you want to?
Yes, actually, that's where I thought we were. Sorry.
Go.
Okay, here we go. So, what's your favourite classic story for you?
See, I'm not a classics reader. I'm really... People find that so surprising.
Yes, I know. Listen to us.
I know. I had a friend once who told me he was starting to read Moby Dick, and I'm like, okay. And he said, because you've read it. I said, no, I haven't. He said, but haven't you read everything? And I said, no, I don't really read classics.
How did you avoid reading classics?
Well, I guess I did, and I don't... Yeah. I even thought about what the definition of a classic is.
Oh, yes.
Yes. And... I mean, I guess if I had to think of one off the top of my head, probably Alice in Wonderland is a story that sort of is there as just part of me, if you know what I mean. So sometimes it's not that I don't love the book or I don't really remember reading the book, but it's just something that's always been there and I've read it and it sort of stays with you. Some Australian ones like Taronga.
Oh, yes.
By Victor
Kelleher. Yeah.
So that's probably one. And even Ash Road by Ivan Southall. That's still in print.
Oh, yes.
And I was thinking about that today because that book I think still stands the test of time because it's a bushfire story and it's a survival story.
Yeah.
Some of the language in it is old-fashioned, but that's part of the story. But I think the essence of the story could easily be read by kids today without them thinking, oh, gee, it's an old...
Yeah, I was going to say, how do kids cope with that older language? You know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
No, I think it's probably because of the setting in this book and because of the type of story that it is, they would be okay with that.
Still a powerful story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
What's a genre that you took a while to get into?
And still...
Classics?
No. Yes. No, fantasy. I'm not a fantasy reader.
Not at all?
At all. Absolutely not. I'm trying. I'm really, really trying.
What is it about that you just...
Well, over the years I've decided that I think it's partly a block I have in my brain because when I do read a fantasy novel and I enjoy it, I think, oh, that's a surprise. So I think it's a mental thing. But I know it's that really high fantasy I struggle with. I don't cope well if the names of people are weird and hard to pronounce.
Yes.
Because I find myself spending so much brain power on translating that and keeping those words and that in my head that I lose the focus of the story.
You don't rename them.
No, I know people do that, but I don't.
I've heard people say, yes, I just rename everybody.
Yeah, so that's what I think my reason is.
Yes.
But I'm getting better. And when I look back on some of my favourite books that I've ever read, they're fantasy. So, or have elements of fantasy. I think I like books which are set in reality that have fantastical elements.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
But I'm not a big fantasy reader.
Because you did mention Alice in Wonderland.
I know. It's just, and, you know, going back to audiobooks, I listened to Northern Lights by Philip Pullman.
Yes.
It was the best audiobook I've ever, because it was read by a cast of characters.
Yes.
And he was the narrator and he has an amazing voice. I would never have read that book.
Yep.
But I loved listening to it.
I'm a bit the same. I like a story to have, you know, this could really have happened, you know. I love that, you know.
But then I did just read a fantasy novel and I read it for another reason and almost so that I can figure out what my experience was reading it. And once you break it down, like a lot of elements in this book were elements that I like in other stories, you know, friendship and courage and being an outsider and bullying even. So I think sometimes I know I've got this wall in my head when it comes to fantasy that if I just get over it, I can enjoy the story. And I also say if it's a good enough story, I'll like it.
Yeah.
So.
But you make a good point there about some texts do give us a bit of cognitive overload.
Yeah.
And so that whatever that is, if that's going to make it so much harder for us to read it, it's harder to persist with it. So I think, you know, we take notice of that. You know, because
and I'm not ashamed to, I'm sorry all you fantasy writers out there. As long as there's an audiobook, there's a chance I might listen to it.
Yes. But having said that, you have also read fantasy.
Yeah, I have. I do read. But I say it's not at the top of my pile.
No.
Yep.
Yeah.
What's a great author story?
As in a story about an author?
Yes, or that you've heard an author talk about, because you would have come across a lot of authors.
I do. I do know. Well, there is one story. I just feel like it's not really my story to tell. But Tristan Banks has an amazing story in one of his books. In one of his Tom Weekly books, there's a story called The Scab, which is about a boy who fakes a stomachache to get out of detention, and he does such a good job of faking that his mum says, you either go to school or you go to the doctor. And then he says, well, I'm going to go to the doctor, because he didn't want to go to school. So he goes to the doctor and the doctor pokes and prods. And he says, okay, no worries, just head over to the hospital and someone will meet you there. You need to have your appendix out. So on the way in the car, this little boy who's faked this stomachache, he said, no, look, Mum, I'm really, really sorry. I was lying. I'm not in any pain. I didn't want to do detention. And I apologise, Tristan, if I'm paraphrasing this far too much. And so he gets to the hospital, and then in the hospital he says to the doctors, look, there's nothing wrong with me. Look, you can poke me, it doesn't hurt. I was lying. I'm really, really sorry. And they said, look, it's an easy operation. You'll be fine. So he has his appendix out. But that's the story he wrote about in the book. Turns out that really happened. Tristan Banks
my goodness.
faked a stomach ache to get out of detention and had his appendix removed.
Oh, my goodness. Great story.
So, yeah, I love that story and I tell that story all the time. So thanks, Tristan.
That
Helps me
great.
sell your book.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing and, they're the insights again, isn't it? When authors, as you say, authors are generous. There's this huge generosity. They reveal more about themselves and their inner life than probably any other person in the world or any other profession in the world. So, beautiful.
So, some interesting facts about what you do in the bookshop that we don't know about.
I don't do anything interesting. And that
answers that one.
No, it's true. Like I think my job is pretty good. But I really do probably everything you think that I would do. I do nothing interesting, but I probably do a lot more boring stuff than you would imagine. I know that people think my job is so exciting because I get to sit and read books all day. So that's what people think I do.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was introduced at a school once and the librarian said, "Oh, this is Rebecca. She's got the best job in the world." And I said to the kids, "What do you think I do?" Like they knew that they said, "Oh, you read books all day." And I said, "No." I said, "If I got paid to read books all day, that would be the best job in the world." But I don't. So, there's a lot of boring stuff. There's a lot of data entry. There's a lot of answering phones and taking details. And, that I think it's the opposite of what you've asked me is that there's nothing that exciting, but there's lots of boring stuff. So as much as I like my job and that when I go out to schools, kids can see that I'm excited about my job, but that is the exciting part of my job. There's like any job, there's plenty of boring stuff.
Yeah, boring stuff. Now, Sharon, you thought at the start, what do we call someone who runs a bookshop? And I thought, well, Alan Wright talked about a poemster. What about a bookster?
A bookster.
A bookster.
Yeah.
Okay. We're having a bit of fun with language. What's your advice for teachers to motivate older readers? Well, we've done
just
a bit
been,
of that.
Yeah, and I think for them to read and to be willing to read their books as well. And I think we've said that about the younger as well. But I think to know what's out there is the only way you're going to know what to recommend.
And be a reader yourself.
And be a reader. But for adults to take advantage of all that social media as well. Because, all you have to do is start following a few key people.
Yes.
That will then introduce you to other people that you'll, if you're just on Instagram for, who's on there just for half an hour a day, but however long it takes just to flick through, you'll think, that book looks really good. Yeah. So then you go and look it up. So I think as much as there's a lot of negatives about social media, I think that if it's used in the right way, there's a lot of positive uses for it too.
Well, it's building a whole community.
It is.
Yeah. And I really just have to sort of concur with that. The time that made the biggest difference to me as a teacher was when I dedicated a year to reading as much as I could that I thought would interest the students that I was working with. Yeah. And that just set up, and then I tried to move out of that as well, thinking, well, I can't just read for this group of children this year. Let me just read as much as I can. And that actually built the habit of just trying to read as much as I can, because without the knowledge of what's there for them, it's harder to recommend and it's harder to motivate.
It is.
So we do have to live it, and it's so good when we can have, because we still need, it's really important to know, what am I going to invest my time in? Where can I go with that? So thank you, Rebecca, once again.
And particularly that we sort of emphasise not just the children reading or the young adults reading this wide range of books. We're also emphasising that the teachers using this great literature as a central part of their teaching, especially in primary schools, but also the English teachers in secondary schools.
Yeah.
Yep. So thank you very much, Rebecca, for your time again and just giving us a whole new world of things to read. And
yes, and for taking that focus. Thank you, for the secondaries. We've got lots of secondary people that are checking in with us saying, oh, remember we're here too.
Well, it is only the tip of the iceberg. So
yes, but it's a good tip to dive into. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you for having me. I think I'll dive into it. I'm not sure about diving off of anything.
Yes.
No, thanks Rebecca. Happy reading, and we will list
We'll list all the books.
Lots of, yes, so people can reference back to those.
And show that flag. I love the flag.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for listening to us today. And come on again to our next podcast next week.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.